Her left index finger was found inside a sealed evidence bag labeled Case 2018-0914. But the woman sitting in the triage chair of San Francisco General on October 14, 2026, was using that same finger to point at a glass of water. It was the same fingerprint. It was the same DNA. 8 years after she disappeared into the granite maw of Yosemite, Sarah Loftis came back. And she didn't come back alone. Why did the federal database flag her as deceased 4 years before she walked through those sliding doors? Sarah Loftis was the person you want with you when the world ends. She was a master diver. She was a search and rescue volunteer with 300 logged hours in the high Sierras. She didn't get lost. She didn't trip. On the morning of September 12, 2018, she checked her gear 3 times, a habit that had kept her alive in sub-zero alpine conditions for a decade. She parked her 2015 silver Tacoma at the trailhead of Cloud's Rest. She was carrying a Garmin InReach, 2 liters of water, and a thermal blanket. She told the ranger at the kiosk she'd be back by 5 p.m. because she had a dinner reservation in Mariposa at 7:30. Sarah was precise. She was prepared. She was the gold standard of outdoor safety. But preparation assumes the rules of the world remain consistent, and Sarah was about to step into a place where the rules had been rewritten. The hike started with a series of mundane steps recorded by her fitness tracker. 8:15 a.m. Heart rate 72 beats per minute. 9:30 a.m. Elevation gain 1,200 feet. 10:45 a.m. Sarah stops for 42 seconds to take a photo of a western juniper. This photo is the last image found on her synced cloud storage. It shows a perfectly clear trail, sunlight dappling the needles, and a shadow in the corner that investigators spent 3 years trying to identify. It isn't a human shadow. It's too long, too jagged, and it doesn't match the angle of the trees. At 11:02 a.m., Sarah's GPS tracker performed a hard reset. This shouldn't be possible without manual input. 5 minutes later, the device sent a single outgoing ping from a location 6 miles off trail, in an area of vertical cliffs that would have required professional climbing gear to reach in that time frame. She would have had to fly. When Sarah didn't show up for her 7:30 dinner, her friend called the authorities. The search was massive. Dogs, helicopters, FLIR thermal imaging, the works. They found her truck exactly where she left it. Inside was her cell phone, sitting in the cup holder. This is where it stops making sense. Sarah never left her phone behind. It was her primary tool for navigation. More importantly, the phone was powered off, but the battery had been physically removed and placed in the glove box. The screws holding the phone's casing together had been laid out on the passenger seat in a perfect geometric circle. But the Park Service didn't release the detail about the screws until 2019. Ask yourself why they wanted the public to believe she simply wandered off. For 11 days, the most elite trackers in the country combed a 5-mile radius. They found nothing. No scent for the bloodhounds, no broken branches, no disturbed soil. On the 12th day, a searcher found her left boot. It was sitting upright in the middle of a granite slab, 3 miles from her last known ping. The laces were tied in a double knot, but the boot was empty. No sock, no blood, no signs of a struggle. It looked like she had simply been lifted out of it. The lead investigator, a man named Miller who had seen 30 years of mountain disappearances, wrote in his private journal that the boot felt like a placement. It wasn't dropped, it was staged. You've probably walked a trail like this, felt that sudden prickle on the back of your neck, and told yourself it was just the wind. You looked back and saw nothing. Sarah didn't look back. She kept moving into a geography that wasn't on the map. 6 months after the search was called off, Sarah's sister Elena received a phone call from Sarah's number. It lasted 4 seconds. There was no voice, only the sound of high-velocity wind and a rhythmic metallic clicking. When Elena tried to call back, the provider told her the number had been disconnected for months. The police dismissed it as a glitch or a cruel prank. They told Elena to move on. They declared Sarah presumably dead in 2022. Then came the evidence that changed the internal classification of the case from missing person to categorical anomaly. In 2024, a hiker found a digital camera at the bottom of a ravine near Tenaya Lake. The memory card was corrupted, but forensic recovery pulled one file, a video dated 3 days after Sarah vanished. In the footage, Sarah is sitting in a room with white, windowless walls. She is wearing her hiking clothes, but they are pristine. No dirt, no sweat, no tears. She looks directly into the lens and says, "The air here is heavy, but the weight is gone." She then holds up her left hand. Her index finger is missing. The wound is perfectly cauterized, healed as if the injury had happened years ago, not days. And then, the camera pans to the left. For a fraction of a second, you can see a reflection in a dark surface. It isn't a room. It's a cockpit. Sarah Loftis was a woman who knew how to survive, yet she spent 8 years in a space that doesn't exist on any GPS coordinate. When she walked into that hospital in 2026, she was wearing the same clothes from the video. They still weren't dirty. Her first words to the nurse weren't a plea for help. She didn't ask for her family. She looked at the digital clock on the wall, saw the date, and whispered, "I'm early. They said the harvest wasn't until December." Underneath her fingernails, lab techs found a substance that hasn't been classified by any known geological survey. A silty, violet dust that vibrates when exposed to ultraviolet light. The government arrived at the hospital 20 minutes after the DNA match hit the system. They didn't come to contain a witness. The transition from Sarah Loftis being a missing person to a national security asset happened in exactly 48 minutes. At 3:12 p.m., the hospital's internal server was remotely accessed by an external agency. By 4 p.m., the entire wing of San Francisco General was placed under a medical quarantine that had nothing to do with a virus. The investigators who arrived weren't wearing park ranger tan or local police blue. They were in civilian suits with badges that bore no department name. They moved Sarah to a secure facility in the Presidio, a place where the walls are shielded against electromagnetic frequencies. They needed to know how a woman could lose an index finger in 2018, have that finger recovered by a search team in a different county in 2019, and then walk into a building with that same finger attached and functioning in 2026. This is where the investigation turns into a cover-up. The official report from the 2018 search stated that Sarah's finger was found in a remote crevice by a cadaver dog. But the forensic pathologist who examined that finger, Dr. Aris Thorne, disappeared from the public record 3 months later. His private notes, leaked by his daughter in 2025, described the finger not as a biological remain, but as a biological transmitter. He wrote that the bone marrow had been replaced with a fine silver filament that was still pulsing at a frequency of 14.2 hertz. But here's what the police didn't release until 2019. The finger found in the woods didn't have any decay. It was sitting in the dirt for a year, exposed to insects, rain, and snow, yet the cells were in a state of perfect stasis. When Sarah was questioned in the Presidio, she didn't talk about the woods. She didn't talk about being kidnapped. She spoke about the interval. She described a place in Yosemite where the geography folds. She told them that if you walk a specific sequence of steps near the base of Cloud's Rest, steps that ignore the marked trail, the sound of the wind stops. She called it a thermal void. Investigators call this a phenomenon where heat and sound are sucked out of an environment, leaving a pocket of absolute silence. Sarah claimed she hadn't been gone for 8 years. To her, it had been 3 weeks. She described a group of people she met in the interval, people who looked like hikers, dressed in North Face and Patagonia, but who never ate and never slept. They were the custodians. They told her they were maintaining the park, but not the trees or the trails. They were maintaining the boundary. None of this explains what was found in her pocket when she was admitted to the hospital. Tucked into the waistband of her hiking pants was a small, smooth stone made of translucent blue material. When geologists at UC Berkeley were secretly asked to identify it, they found it wasn't a stone at all. It was a data storage device made of a glass ceramic unknown to modern manufacturing. And on that device was a map. Not a map of Yosemite, but a map of the Bay Area, showing access points inside shopping malls, parking garages, and subway tunnels. The obsession shifted from Sarah to the map. A retired detective named Marcus Holloway, who had been tracking impossible disappearances in national parks for 2 decades, became the investigator proxy for a public that felt something was wrong. Holloway found that Sarah wasn't the first. In 2012, a boy vanished in Crater Lake and returned 3 days later with the same violet dust under his nails. In 2015, a biologist in the Everglades disappeared for a month and returned with a surgical scar on her neck that glowed under infrared light. The system, the Park Service, the Department of the Interior, has a protocol for this. It's called Plan Fragment 4. It isn't a search and rescue plan, it's a containment strategy. When Holloway tried to file a Freedom of Information Act request regarding Fragment 4, his bank accounts were frozen, and his car was involved in a routine traffic stop that ended with his hard drives being confiscated. They aren't trying to find the missing, they are trying to hide the returned. At 6:22 p.m. on her second night in custody, Sarah Loftis did something that challenged the laws of physics. The security camera in her room shows her standing in the center of the floor. She begins to hum, a low, resonant tone that causes the camera feed to pixelate. Then, she simply begins to blur. It isn't a camera glitch. The physical matter of her body starts to vibrate until she becomes a smear of light. When the guards burst into the room 4 seconds later, she was gone. The bed was made. The blue stone was missing from the evidence locker. And on the wall, written in the violet dust, was a single coordinate. It pointed to a parking space in a garage on Mason and 5th. You've probably driven past a place like this, a 6-level concrete structure where the air feels a little too cold and the lights flicker in a pattern you can't quite catch. This detail wasn't released because the garage is still open. People park there every day. They walk past space 4C and never notice that their watches lose 3 seconds every time they cross the line. Sarah's last transmission wasn't the phone call to her sister. It was a note left in the hospital's internal mail system, addressed to no one. It read, "The door doesn't lock from the outside. It locks from the truth." The theory no one wants to believe is that Sarah Loftis didn't escape a predator. She was recruited by a competitor. By the time Marcus Holloway reached the parking garage on Mason and 5th, the coordinates Sarah left behind had already begun to manifest a physical change in the environment. At 2:14 a.m., the structural sensors in the building registered a localized weight increase of 4,000 pounds in space 4C, despite the space being empty. This is what physicists call a gravitational anchor. Sarah wasn't just a victim, she was a beacon. The obsession of the system shifted from containment to a terrifying realization. The interval, Sarah described, wasn't a place you go to, it's a place that is moving into us. But here is the evidence that reframes the last 8 years. The finger, found in the woods in 2019, was tested again in a private lab before the government seized the records. The mitochondrial DNA didn't just match Sarah. It was advanced. The telomeres, the caps on the ends of our chromosomes that shorten as we age, were significantly longer than they were in her baseline samples from 2018. She wasn't decaying, she was de-aging. The Sarah Loftis who walked into the hospital wasn't 38 years old. Biologically, she was 22. This wasn't a kidnapping, it was a factory reset. This detail explains why the Park Service is so desperate to keep hikers on the trails. The trails aren't for your safety. They are the borders of a grazing land. The investigation by Holloway revealed a pattern of active zones that align perfectly with the map found on the blue stone. These zones aren't in the wilderness. They are in high-density urban centers. One is a basement in a public library in Seattle. Another is a maintenance closet in the Denver airport. The third is Space 4C. Theory 1. The custodians are an indigenous intelligence that has always been here, folding the geography to remain unseen. Theory 2. They are us, returning from a point in the future where the Earth is no longer habitable, using the national parks as entry ports. Theory 3. The one Holloway screams about in his final recorded manifesto, is that Sarah Loftis isn't Sarah Loftis anymore. She is a biological shell being used to transport something into the city. Think about the silence Sarah described, the thermal void. At 3:45 a.m., 3 days after Sarah vanished from the Presidio, the security guard at the Mason and Fifth Garage reported a pocket of cold so intense it cracked the windshields of 4 cars parked in the vicinity of Level 4. He didn't see a woman. He saw a shimmering in the air, like heat rising from asphalt, but it was freezing to the touch. When he stepped into Space 4C, his radio emitted 47 seconds of that same metallic clicking heard in the voicemail to Sarah's sister. Then, he felt a pulling sensation in his chest. He quit the next day. He told Holloway, "It felt like the room was trying to remember me, but I didn't have the right code." No one has explained why Sarah's Garmin InReach, which was recovered from her truck, showed a logged message that was never sent. It was time-stamped September 14, 2018, 2 days after she went missing. The message read, "They are measuring the marrow. They say the bone is too thin for the weight of the change." This implies that the extraction of her finger wasn't a violent act, but a sampling, a test of the biological transmitter Dr. Thorne described. If the system knew this as early as 2019, then every search mission conducted since then hasn't been looking for survivors. They've been looking for successful vessels. The stakes became existential when Holloway discovered the harvest Sarah mentioned. In the federal archives, he found a redacted file from 1944. It described a fluctuation in the population of several small towns near park boundaries, not people disappearing, but people returning. People who didn't age, people who stopped eating, people who all had a specific rhythmic clicking in their speech after 6 months. The government calls these the echoes. And the echoes always congregate in places like Space 4C right before a major geographical shift. At 11:59 p.m., Holloway's GPS tracked him to the garage. His last transmission to his daughter was a text. "I see her. She's standing in 4C, but she's not standing on the air 3 inches above it. Don't come looking for me. The door is open." Since that text, Holloway hasn't accessed his bank accounts. His car was found in the garage, locked from the inside, with the keys in the ignition and his phone sitting in the cup holder. The battery had been removed and placed in the glove box. You've likely felt that sudden drop in temperature in a stairwell or a parking lot and hurried your pace. You told yourself it was the air conditioning or a draft. But ask yourself, why did the garage management install high-intensity UV lights in space 4C last month? Why is there a guard stationed there who doesn't wear a uniform? The truth is that Sarah Loftis didn't come back to save us or to warn us. She came back to prepare the ground. The violet dust isn't a residue, it's a soil, and it's spreading. The reality is that we are no longer looking for a missing hiker. We are looking for the end of a boundary. What happened to Sarah Loftis is a biological invasion disguised as a tragedy, and the institutions you trust to protect you are merely acting as its ground crew. The Park Service, the DHS, the unnamed agencies, they aren't hiding the truth to prevent panic. They are hiding it because they are waiting for their turn to be reset. This is what this means for you. At this very moment, there are 1,600 people listed as unexplained disappearances in the national park system. In the last 18 months, 34 of them have returned. They didn't return to their families. They returned to the urban access points identified on the blue stone. They are sitting in the back of libraries. They are standing in the corners of garages. They are the people you see in the peripheral of your vision who don't quite move with the rhythm of the crowd. They are the echoes, and they are waiting for December. Sarah Loftis said the harvest was coming, and the evidence suggests she was right. In November 2025, the atmospheric sensors in the Sierra Nevadas recorded a 40% increase in the thermal void phenomenon. The geography is folding faster now. If you go to Yosemite today, you'll see new fences. You'll see areas marked ecological restoration, do not enter. They aren't restoring the plants. They are covering the spots where the ground has turned to violet silt. You're standing at a trailhead. Your phone has 2 bars. You're 30 minutes from your car. You feel the air grow heavy, a weight pressing down on your shoulders that has nothing to do with your pack. You hear a rhythmic, metallic clicking coming from the trees. What do? You run. But as Sarah Loftis proved, running only works if the geography stays where you left it. If you step off that trail, if you find yourself in the silence, remember, the door doesn't lock from the outside. The Mason and Fifth garage still operates. The management recently painted over space 4C with a thick industrial gray, but the paint won't stick. It peels off in 24 hours, revealing the violet stains underneath. Cars park on that level every day. Commuters walk past that space, rushing to catch the elevator, complaining about the cold draft that never goes away. No one looks at space 4C. No one notices the shimmering 3 inches above the concrete. But you will. Next time you're walking to your car and the world goes silent, don't look for Sarah Loftis. Don't look for the truth. Just hope that you aren't early. The garage is open, the coordinates are set, and the harvest doesn't care if you're prepared.